Imagine for a moment that every battle you've been fighting, every struggle with lack, with fear, with illness, with discord, has been nothing more than shadow boxing. You've been exhausting yourself against phantoms while the real power, the Christ presence, has been standing by, waiting for you to step aside and say, "Not by my might, but by thy Spirit." What if I told you that your greatest spiritual breakthrough comes not from fighting harder, but from fighting less? Jesus said, "Take heart, your battle is mine." There comes a moment in every spiritual journey when we must face a profound truth that shakes the very foundation of how we've been living. We have been taught to struggle, to overcome, to demonstrate our faith through effort and persistence. But what if the entire premise has been backwards? Jesus said, "Take heart, for I have overcome the world. Not I will help you overcome, not together we shall overcome, but I have overcome." Past tense, already accomplished. The victory exists before you ever perceived the battle. This is the great revelation that transforms everything, the nature of true spiritual warfare. You see, most of us come to the spiritual path still carrying the weapons of the material world. We think we must fight lack with affirmations of abundance. We think we must battle disease with declarations of health. We think we must overcome fear through mental exercises of courage, but this is still engaging with the problem on its own terms. This is still accepting the reality of the condition and then trying to change it. And herein lies our difficulty. The Christ message is not that you must overcome these conditions. The Christ message is that these conditions have no reality in the kingdom of God. They exist only in the dream of material sense, in the illusion of separation from the divine source. When Jesus said, "Your battle is mine," he was revealing something extraordinary. He was not saying, "I will help you in your battle." He was saying the battle itself belongs to a realm of consciousness where the Christ operates, not where you, as a human being, must struggle. The practice of non-resistance. Now, this requires a complete reversal of our habitual thinking. We have been conditioned to believe that we must do something about every problem. If we're sick, we must seek healing. If we're poor, we must create prosperity. If we're troubled, we must find peace. But watch what happens in the consciousness of the mystic. The mystic does not fight the disease. The mystic realizes health is already established in divine consciousness. The mystic does not struggle for supply. The mystic rests in the awareness of infinite abundance already present. This is not positive thinking. This is spiritual discernment. Jesus demonstrated this perfectly when he stood before Pilate. He did not defend himself. He did not argue. He did not resist. Why? Because he was living from a dimension of consciousness where the accusations had no power, where the threats had no substance, where even death itself was revealed as an illusion. Becoming transparent to truth, the illusion of personal battling, understanding that our struggles exist only in the realm of human perception, not in spiritual reality, the impersonal nature of divine power. Recognizing that God's work is not dependent on our effort, but flows through our receptivity, resting in the presence. The practice of stillness as the gateway to allowing Christ to fight our battles beyond demonstrations to realization. Moving from seeking outcomes to dwelling in the consciousness of truth, living as transparency. Becoming channels through which divine grace operates without personal interference. When we look honestly at our spiritual lives, most of us discover we have been engaged in an exhausting enterprise of trying to overcome conditions through personal effort. We wake each morning and survey the landscape of our existence, our health, our finances, our relationships, our state of... And immediately we begin the work of improvement, of correction, of demonstration. We affirm truth. we deny error, we visualize outcomes, we declare our divine inheritance. And yet, the struggles continue. The battles seem endless. Why? Because we have accepted the fundamental premise that these conditions are real and must be fought against. This is the great illusion that keeps us bound to the wheel of human effort. We believe the lack is real, so we must demonstrate abundance. We believe the disease is real, so we must demonstrate healing. We believe the discord is real, so we must demonstrate harmony. But in accepting the reality of these conditions, we have already lost the spiritual battle. We have agreed to fight on the enemy's territory using weapons that have no power in the spiritual realm. The mystical revelation begins when you recognize that the battle itself exists only in the dream of material sense. In divine consciousness, there is no lack to overcome because infinity is already present. There is no disease to heal because life is eternal and indestructible. There is no discord to harmonize because divine love is the only reality. The conditions you are fighting against are shadows cast by the belief in separation from God. They have no substance, no law, no power to sustain themselves except through your continued acceptance of them as real. This does not mean you deny your present experience or pretend problems do not exist in the human picture. It means you stop giving them spiritual validity. You stop treating them as if they were established in divine law. You recognize them as temporary appearances that arise from the mist of human consciousness and dissolve when the light of spiritual awareness dawns. The battle you have been fighting is with phantoms, and the exhaustion you feel comes from swinging at shadows. When you cease to give these appearances the status of reality, when you stop engaging them as if they were divinely ordained conditions, requiring your personal effort to overcome, you discover something remarkable. They begin to lose their power over you, not because you fought them successfully, but because you withdrew your belief in their reality. The great error in most spiritual practice is the assumption that God's power operates through our personal will, our mental clarity, or our spiritual worthiness. We think that if we meditate correctly, affirm properly, or pray with enough faith, then divine power will respond to our efforts and produce the results we seek. This is still making God subject to human action, still placing the burden of demonstration on our shoulders, still living as if the infinite requires our finite cooperation to accomplish its work. But observe what happens in true spiritual consciousness. Divine power does not wait for your permission. It does not depend on the quality of your meditation or the intensity of your desire. It does not measure your worthiness or check your spiritual credentials. The sun does not shine more brightly on the saint than on the sinner. Rain falls on the just and unjust alike. Divine grace is impersonal, not cold or indifferent, but operating according to spiritual law rather than human petition. This impersonal nature of God is perhaps the most liberating truth you can realize. It means you cannot earn divine favor through good behavior, nor can you lose it through failure. It means your demonstrations are not dependent on achieving some perfect state of consciousness, but on recognizing what already is. The power that governs the universe, that maintains the planets in their orbits and causes the seed to become the mighty tree, does not require your assistance. It requires only your non-interference. When you attempt to use spiritual power for personal purposes, to heal your body, to increase your wealth, to manipulate circumstances, you are still operating from the ego consciousness that believes it is separate from the divine source and must petition it for favors. But when you rest in the awareness that divine intelligence is already functioning perfectly, that infinite abundance is already flowing, that eternal life is already present, then you become transparent to that power. You are no longer trying to make something happen. You are allowing what already is to reveal itself through your consciousness. This is why the mystic does not pray for things, but rests in the presence. The mystic does not seek to direct divine power, but to be directed by it. The mystic becomes the instrument through which impersonal divine grace flows into visibility, not through personal effort or worthiness, but through the simple practice of receptivity and recognition. In the midst of our daily struggles, we rush from one solution to another, from one technique to the next, believing that somewhere in the arsenal of spiritual methods lies the answer to our problems. We think if we just pray harder, meditate longer, affirm more powerfully, we will finally break through to the demonstration we seek. But all this activity, all this spiritual busyness keeps us locked in the very consciousness that created the problem. We are still operating from the belief that we must do something, achieve something, become something other than what we already are in God. The practice of stillness is not another technique to add to your collection of spiritual methods. It is the cessation of all techniques, the laying down of all personal effort, the complete surrender of the belief that you can make something happen through your own power. When you become still, you are not trying to contact God, for God is already present. You are not trying to receive guidance, for divine intelligence is already functioning. You are not trying to create peace, for the peace of God is already established as your true nature. This stillness is an act of trust so profound that the human mind cannot comprehend it. You are trusting that in the absence of your personal striving, divine grace will operate. You are trusting that when you stop interfering with the flow of infinite intelligence, the perfect outcome will manifest. You are trusting that the same power that breathes your body, beats your heart, and maintains the entire universe in perfect order, can also handle whatever situation appears before you. In this silence, something extraordinary happens. The Christ consciousness, which has been obscured by the noise of personal sense, begins to emerge, not as something you have created or achieved, but as what has always been present beneath the surface turbulence of human thought. This Christ presence does not fight your battles. It reveals that the battles themselves are illusions arising from the dream of separation. In stillness, you discover that the healing you sought was already accomplished, the supply you needed was already present, the peace you desired was already established. The work is not to create these things, but to be still enough to perceive what divine consciousness has already made eternally available. Most students of spiritual truth remain trapped in the consciousness of seeking demonstrations. They want to demonstrate health, demonstrate supply, demonstrate harmony in their relationships. They measure their spiritual progress by the visible results they can produce in the outer world. If the demonstration appears, they feel they have succeeded. If it does not, they believe they have failed or that they need more understanding, better technique, stronger faith. But this entire approach keeps them bound to the world of effects, forever chasing outcomes, forever judging their spiritual life by material conditions. The mystic discovers something far more profound than demonstration. The mystic discovers realization. What is the difference? Demonstration implies that something is lacking and must be brought into existence through spiritual work. Realization recognizes that nothing is lacking, because divine completeness is already established. Demonstration operates in the realm of time. You are trying to change a condition from what it is now to what you want it to be in the future. Realization operates in the eternal now, where divine perfection is already present and needs only to be recognized. When you live in the consciousness of realization, you are not seeking to change your life. You are awakening to what your life already is in spiritual reality. You are not trying to heal your body. You are realizing that divine life knows no sickness. You are not trying to attract abundance. You are recognizing that infinite supply is the very nature of God expressing as your experience. This is not mere positive thinking or mental gymnastics. This is the direct perception of spiritual truth. The shift from seeking demonstrations to dwelling in realization transforms your entire spiritual practice. You stop begging, pleading, affirming, visualizing, and manipulating. You begin simply to rest in awareness. You abide in the consciousness of truth. You live from the recognition that God is the only presence and the only power. In this consciousness, what the world calls miracles happen naturally. Not because you made them happen, but because the illusions that obscured spiritual reality have dissolved in the light of your awareness. You are no longer trying to demonstrate God's presence. You are living as the presence itself made manifest. The ultimate spiritual attainment is not to become a powerful person who can demonstrate truth, but to become so transparent that divine grace flows through you without obstruction. This is the consciousness Jesus embodied when he said, "I of mine own self do nothing. The Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works." He was not claiming personal power or spiritual superiority. He was revealing that he had become completely transparent to the divine presence, allowing it to function without the interference of personal will, personal ambition, or personal sense. Most of us approach the spiritual path with the goal of becoming better, stronger, more enlightened versions of ourselves. We want to be the one who heals, the one who demonstrates, the one who overcomes. But this is still the ego consciousness operating under spiritual disguise. We are still claiming a personal identity separate from God, an identity that can achieve spiritual things. True spiritual maturity comes when you realize that there is no personal you to achieve anything. There is only divine consciousness expressing itself as individual being. Living as transparency means you no longer take credit for the good that appears in your life, nor do you blame yourself for the challenges. You recognize that both the appearances of harmony and discord arise from the degree to which consciousness is clear or clouded. Your work is not to make things happen, but to keep the window of consciousness clean, to remove the obstructions of personal desire, personal fear, personal judgment that block the free flow of divine grace. This requires a complete reversal of everything the world has taught you. The world says, build yourself up, make yourself strong, develop your personal power. The spiritual path says, decrease so that he may increase. Empty yourself so that divine fullness can pour through. Become nothing so that the all can express itself as you. This is not self-negation or false humility. This is the recognition that your true identity has never been the limited personal sense of self, but the infinite consciousness of God individualized. When you live as transparency, you become a channel of blessing to everyone you encounter, not because you are doing anything, but because the Christ presence flows through you unobstructed, healing, prospering, harmonizing, not by your will but by its own nature. And so we come to the place where words must give way to silence, where teaching must yield to practice, where understanding must dissolve into living experience. You have heard the message that your battles are not yours to fight. You have been reminded that divine power operates impersonally, requiring only your receptivity. You have been invited into the stillness where Christ consciousness emerges. You have discovered the difference between seeking demonstrations and dwelling in realization. And you have been shown the path of transparency, where personal sense dissolves and divine grace flows freely. But none of this becomes real until you live it. None of this transforms your experience until you practice it in the moments when fear arises, when lack appears, when discord threatens to overwhelm you. In those moments you must remember, this battle is not mine. I of mine own self can do nothing, but the Christ within me has already overcome. The spiritual life is not complicated. It is actually the simplest thing in the world. It requires only that you stop, that you be still, that you release your grip on personal effort and allow divine grace to have its way. Every morning you begin again with this consciousness. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to practice transparency. Every moment is an invitation to rest in the presence rather than struggle in personal sense. Take heart, not because the path ahead is easy, but because the journey is already complete. The victory is already won. The Christ has already overcome the world. All that remains is for you to awaken to this truth, to live from this consciousness, to become so transparent that the world looking at you sees not you at all, but the very presence of God made visible. This is your spiritual destiny. This is your divine inheritance. This is the truth that sets you free. Go now in peace, knowing that you go not alone, not by personal power, but as the very presence of the infinite expressing itself in time and space. Let your life be the evidence that Christ lives, not as a distant Savior, but as the very consciousness with which you meet each moment. The battle is His, the victory is assured, and you are the transparency through which divine grace accomplishes what human effort never could. Be still, rest, allow, and watch as the Christ within reveals its eternal nature as your only reality. Here is the practical application of this teaching. You must learn to become transparent. You must learn to step aside and let the Christ consciousness operate through you, not as you. When a problem presents itself, and problems will present themselves as long as you appear to be in human form, your first response must not be to fix it, to heal it, or to overcome it. Your first response must be to pause, to become still, and to realize, this is not my battle. I do not have the power to overcome this through human effort, but the Christ within me has already overcome all worldly conditions. This is not passivity. This is the highest form of spiritual activity, the activity of receptivity, of openness, of allowing divine grace to flow unobstructed by personal sense. The freedom in surrender. Many students misunderstand surrender. They think it means giving up, becoming weak, or accepting defeat. But true spiritual surrender is the recognition that there never was a you separate from God who could fight these battles in the first place. When you surrender, you're not surrendering to the problem. You're surrendering the illusion that you are separate from the divine source, separate from infinite wisdom, separate from eternal life. Jesus could say, "Take heart," because he knew that in spiritual reality there is nothing to fear. The world of appearances may present 1,000 challenges, but these are like waves on the surface of an infinite ocean. The depths remain undisturbed, peaceful, whole. Living from realization, now we come to the heart of the teaching. You cannot live this truth through belief alone. You cannot intellectually understand it and expect transformation. This teaching must become a living realization within your consciousness. What does this mean practically? It means that when discord appears, you do not immediately react with human solutions. You turn within, you become still, you listen, and in that silence you allow the Christ consciousness to reveal the nothingness of the appearance and the allness of God. It means that when lack seems to surround you, you do not panic or scheme. You rest in the awareness that divine consciousness knows no lack, that infinity cannot be depleted, that the source of all supply is forever flowing. It means that when fear knocks at your door, you do not battle it with affirmations. You recognize that perfect love casts out fear not by fighting it, but by revealing its unreality in the light of divine presence. The daily practice. How do you live this teaching moment by moment? You begin each day by releasing all sense of personal responsibility for your life, not irresponsibly, but spiritually. You acknowledge, of my own self, I can do nothing, but the Father within me does the works. Throughout your day, when challenges arise, you practice the pause. Before responding, before reacting, before engaging with the problem on its own terms, you pause and remember, this battle is not mine. The Christ within me has already overcome. You develop the habit of inner listening, not for instructions on what to do, but for the realization of what already is. You're not seeking guidance on how to fix your life. You're seeking the awareness that your life, in spiritual reality, is already whole, already complete, already at peace. Take heart, so I leave you with this. Take heart, not because your problems will magically disappear, but because you are being invited into a dimension of consciousness where problems have no power, where challenges have no substance, where the entire drama of human existence is revealed as the dream from which we are awakening. Your battle is not yours because there is no battle in spiritual reality. There is only the infinite unfolding of divine grace, the eternal expression of divine love, the continuous revelation of divine presence. Stop fighting, stop struggling, stop trying to demonstrate truth through personal effort. Instead, rest, be still. Become transparent to the Christ consciousness that already is your true identity. The victory is already won. The battle is already over. All that remains is for you to awaken to this reality and live from it. This is the promise. This is the truth. This is the way of the mystical Christ. Take heart, for I have overcome the world. In stillness we discover what effort could never achieve. In surrender we find what struggle could never win. In transparency we become what we have always been, the very presence of God made manifest.
You think Joel Goldsmith was just another spiritual teacher with nice ideas? You're about to discover why the most skeptical minds who dismissed him ended up becoming his most devoted students. What changed their perspective wasn't argument, it was direct experience of a power they couldn't deny. The critics said his teachings were too simple, too mystical, disconnected from reality. They wanted complexity, formulas, step-by-step methods. But Goldsmith taught something that threatened their entire intellectual framework, that healing and transformation don't come from human effort, but from spiritual realization. Here's what the skeptics missed. Goldsmith never asked anyone to believe him. He said, try this practice for 30 days, then judge. Those who accepted this challenge discovered something that shattered their doubts. They experienced tangible changes in health, relationships, and circumstances through pure consciousness work. The technique that converted critics into believers is called the practice of the presence. Not as religious ritual, but as actual conscious awareness of spiritual reality underlying all material appearance. This isn't faith. This is applied mysticism with measurable results. Before you judge this approach, understand what Goldsmith actually taught. He never promised instant miracles or magical thinking. He spoke of a gradual awakening to truth that already exists, waiting for your recognition. This is why his harshest critics became his greatest advocates after genuine practice. The practice begins with a radical premise. The problem you see isn't what needs fixing. Your health challenge, financial struggle, or relationship conflict is an effect, not a cause. Goldsmith taught that changing effects through human action alone brings temporary relief at best. True transformation requires shifting the consciousness that creates effects. Critics called this impractical escapism until they tested it themselves. A renowned physician who initially dismissed Goldsmith's work applied the practice during a medical crisis when conventional methods failed. Within weeks, his patient showed inexplicable improvement. This doctor spent the next 20 years studying spiritual healing. What converted him wasn't theory, but direct observation. When you stop fighting the material appearance and instead recognize the spiritual reality behind it, something shifts in the invisible realm. This shift then manifests as changed conditions in the visible world. The skeptic's main objection sounds reasonable. If spiritual consciousness solves everything, why doesn't everyone just think their problems away? Goldsmith anticipated this exact criticism. He explained that spiritual realization isn't positive thinking or mental manipulation. It's something entirely different. Positive thinking tries to change conditions through mental force. Spiritual realization recognizes that spiritual perfection already exists, complete and whole, regardless of material appearances. You're not creating something new. You're becoming aware of what has always been true. This distinction is everything. Here's the practice that changes minds. Sit quietly for 15 minutes daily. Don't pray for things to change. Don't visualize outcomes. Simply rest in this awareness. Behind this appearance, spiritual completeness exists now. Hold this knowing without effort or strain. Just recognize truth. Critics who actually practiced this for 30 consecutive days reported something unexpected. Their circumstances didn't always change immediately, but their relationship to circumstances transformed completely. Peace replaced anxiety. Clarity replaced confusion. Then, often gradually, external conditions began aligning with this inner shift. The most compelling evidence comes from those who had everything to lose by admitting Goldsmith was right. Successful business people who built empires through aggressive action discovered a completely different source of power. They found that conscious awareness of spiritual law accomplishes more than human scheming ever could. One corporate executive who ridiculed mysticism faced bankruptcy despite exhaustive human efforts to save his company. Desperate, he reluctantly tried Goldsmith's practice. For 3 months, he spent morning hours in conscious recognition of divine abundance as present reality, not future hope. His mind quieted. New insights emerged. Unexpected opportunities appeared. Within 6 months, his business stabilized through circumstances he never could have orchestrated humanly. He became one of Goldsmith's most articulate advocates, not from blind faith, but from reproducible experience. He discovered that spiritual consciousness doesn't replace intelligent action. It guides action from a higher dimension. This is why your mind will change if you genuinely test this teaching. Goldsmith never asked for belief, only honest experimentation. The practice of recognizing spiritual reality behind material appearance creates results that convert skeptics into students every single time they truly apply it. Let me share the story that silences most critics. Sarah was a psychologist who wrote academic papers debunking spiritual healing as placebo effect and wishful thinking. Her scientific training demanded measurable evidence, controlled studies, rational explanations. Goldsmith's teachings seemed like everything she professionally opposed. Then her daughter developed a condition that medical specialists said would require lifelong management. Sarah exhausted every conventional treatment, every specialist, every therapy protocol. Nothing provided lasting relief. Her daughter's quality of life deteriorated despite Sarah's desperate efforts and considerable resources. A colleague who knew of Sarah's situation quietly gave her Goldsmith's book, The Infinite Way. Sarah initially refused to read it, but one sleepless night, she opened it out of sheer desperation. What she read challenged every assumption she held about how reality works and what actually heals. Goldsmith explained that spiritual healing isn't about convincing God to fix problems. It's about recognizing that spiritual perfection exists as the only reality, while material discord is misperception. This wasn't positive thinking. It was a complete reorientation of consciousness from material to spiritual as the foundation of existence itself. Sarah decided to test the practice with scientific rigor. Every morning for 60 days, she sat in meditation, not praying for her daughter's healing, but recognizing spiritual wholeness as present truth. She didn't visualize health. She rested in awareness that perfection already existed beyond material appearance. The first 2 weeks brought no visible change. But Sarah noticed something unexpected in herself. The consuming anxiety that had dominated her thoughts began lifting. She felt genuine peace for the first time in months, not because circumstances improved, but because her consciousness shifted to a different foundation. Week 3 brought the first physical improvement. Small, easily dismissed as coincidence, but noticeable. Sarah continued the practice without attachment to outcomes, simply maintaining conscious awareness of spiritual reality. By week 7, her daughter showed improvement that medical records couldn't explain through treatment alone. Sarah didn't abandon medical care, she combined it with spiritual realization. But she observed something undeniable. As her own consciousness stabilized in recognition of spiritual truth, her daughter's condition improved in ways that transcended medical intervention. This wasn't correlation, this was causation operating from a dimension science doesn't yet measure. Today, Sarah integrates spiritual consciousness into her psychological practice. She doesn't abandon science, she expands it. Her professional papers now explore consciousness as causal factor in healing, backed by case studies that skeptical colleagues can't easily dismiss. She became what she once criticized. What converted her wasn't blind faith or desperate hope. It was reproducible results from systematic application of Goldsmith's principle. Consciousness precedes condition. Change consciousness, condition follows. This isn't magic. It's spiritual law operating with the same reliability as physical law. Another powerful testimony comes from Marcus, a financial analyst who measured everything through data and probability. He dismissed spiritual teachings as unmeasurable nonsense until a career crisis forced him to consider approaches beyond his rational toolkit. Reluctantly, he applied Goldsmith's practice of recognizing divine abundance as present reality. Marcus kept detailed journals documenting his practice and subsequent life changes. Over 4 months, he recorded shifts in career opportunities, financial circumstances, and professional relationships that probability analysis suggested were beyond chance. His analytical mind couldn't deny the correlation between consciousness work and material results. These stories share common elements: intelligent skeptics, genuine crisis, reluctant experimentation, and undeniable results. They didn't want Goldsmith to be right. Their worldviews, professional identities, and intellectual investments depended on material causation being primary. But direct experience overrode their resistance. The pattern repeats across hundreds of documented cases. Skeptics who actually practice Goldsmith's teachings for sustained periods report consciousness shifts, followed by circumstantial changes. This isn't anecdotal. It's observable pattern. Medical professionals, scientists, business leaders, academics, all discovering that spiritual realization produces tangible results. What makes these testimonies credible is what the witnesses had to lose. They risked professional reputation, peer respect, and intellectual consistency by acknowledging spiritual causation. Yet the results were too significant, too consistent, too reproducible to deny. Truth demanded acknowledgement regardless of cost. This is why your mind will change if you genuinely test these teachings. Not through argument or persuasion, but through direct experience that transcends intellectual debate. Consciousness creates conditions. Recognize spiritual reality. Watch material reality reflect it. This is verifiable mysticism. If these transformation stories inspire you to explore deeper, like this video to help others discover these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. Which testimony resonated most powerfully with your own spiritual journey? Now, let's address the practical question every critic asks. How exactly do you practice this consciousness technique in daily life? Goldsmith provided specific guidance that removes mystical vagueness and creates reproducible method. This isn't abstract philosophy, it's applied spiritual science with clear steps. The foundation practice takes 15 to 30 minutes each morning. Sit quietly where you won't be disturbed. Don't begin with requests or problems. Start with simple recognition. Spiritual perfection exists now, complete and whole. Hold this awareness without mental effort. Let truth dawn in consciousness naturally. Critics say this sounds too simple to work. That's precisely why it works. Human effort based on material perception keeps you trapped in the problem level. Spiritual recognition shifts you to the solution level where problems don't exist. This isn't denial, It's elevation to truth that dissolves false appearance. As you maintain this practice daily, extend it into active life. When challenges arise during your day, pause internally. Don't react from material perception. Recognize spiritual reality present behind the appearance. This conscious pivot from material to spiritual becomes your moment-by-moment practice. Goldsmith taught a complementary technique for specific situations, the practice of non-power. When facing apparent opposition, whether difficult people, challenging circumstances, or health issues, recognize that material appearance has no power to create reality. Only spiritual truth holds creative power. This practice neutralizes the fear that gives material appearance its seeming power over you. When you recognize that the problem has no power to perpetuate itself, something in consciousness releases. The false appearance maintained by your fearful attention begins dissolving. Power returns to where it always existed, in spiritual truth. A business consultant who learned this technique applied it during hostile corporate negotiations. Instead of defending against perceived attacks, he silently recognized that only spiritual law held actual power. The aggressive dynamics dissolved within minutes. His opponents became collaborative partners, baffled by their own shift. He didn't manipulate anyone through mental tactics. He simply withdrew power from material appearance by recognizing spiritual reality as the only causative factor. This inner stance changed the entire energetic field of the negotiation. Consciousness shift preceded circumstantial shift, proving Goldsmith's principle in measurable business outcomes. Another powerful technique addresses the criticism that spiritual practice ignores practical action. Goldsmith taught conscious action versus anxious doing. After your morning practice of recognizing spiritual reality, go into your day's activities. But now your actions flow from spiritual consciousness rather than material anxiety. This distinction transforms everything. Anxious doing tries to force desired outcomes through human will. Conscious action allows spiritual guidance to direct each step. You remain fully engaged with practical responsibilities, but from a completely different inner foundation. The peace you cultivated in meditation now powers your activity. Critics who practice this report remarkable differences. Tasks that once felt overwhelming become manageable. Solutions appear for problems that previously seemed unsolvable. Resources arrive through unexpected channels. This isn't passivity. It's spiritually guided action that accomplishes far more than human striving alone. A surgeon who applied this approach described operating with unprecedented clarity and precision. His hands moved with confidence beyond his conscious control. He recognized this as spiritual intelligence flowing through his trained skills. His success rates improved measurably, documented in hospital records over 2 years of conscious practice. The final complementary technique involves conscious gratitude, but not as most people practice it. Goldsmith taught gratitude not for things received, but recognition of spiritual completeness already present. You're grateful because perfection exists now, not because future desires might manifest. This practice short-circuits the consciousness of lack that blocks demonstration. When you're grateful for present spiritual perfection, you're acknowledging its reality. This acknowledgement is the consciousness that allows spiritual reality to manifest as material experience. Gratitude becomes recognition. Recognition becomes realization. Realization becomes demonstration. These complementary techniques work together. Morning recognition of spiritual truth, moment-by-moment awareness of non-power and material appearance, conscious action from spiritual guidance, and continuous gratitude for present perfection. Practiced consistently, they create consciousness that skeptics can't argue with because results speak louder than words. The beauty of these techniques is their accessibility. No special training required, no mystical experiences necessary, just honest, consistent practice of recognizing spiritual reality as primary truth. Do this for 90 days, document your results, then decide if Goldsmith's teachings deserve criticism or celebration. Let's address the obstacles that stop most people from succeeding with these practices. The first barrier is the demand for immediate proof. Modern minds want instant validation, but consciousness transformation follows natural timing. Seeds grow at their own pace regardless of your impatience. Spiritual unfoldment operates similarly. Goldsmith warned against this obstacle directly. He said 3 to 6 months of consistent practice typically precedes obvious external changes. Most people quit after 2 weeks when dramatic miracles don't appear. They declare the teaching ineffective without completing the actual experiment. This premature judgment prevents the very results they seek. A teacher who struggled with this pattern finally committed to 6 months of practice regardless of visible outcomes. The first month brought only frustration. The second month offered subtle inner shifts, but no external changes. By month 3, she noticed small improvements easily dismissed as coincidence. Month 4 brought undeniable changes. Month 5 produced results she couldn't logically explain. By month 6, her entire life circumstances had transformed in ways she'd stopped hoping for. She realized that her previous attempts failed because she judged the process before it completed its work in consciousness. The second major obstacle is inconsistent practice. People meditate when inspired but skip practice when busy or discouraged. This sporadic approach never builds the consciousness momentum that produces results. Goldsmith compared it to taking medication occasionally, then wondering why you're not healing. Spiritual law requires the same consistency as physical law. You can't plant seeds randomly, water sporadically, then blame the seeds when nothing grows. Consciousness cultivation demands daily attention, especially during periods when you see no evidence of progress. The invisible work in consciousness precedes visible manifestation. An entrepreneur who failed repeatedly with spiritual practices finally recognized this pattern in himself. He treated spiritual work like optional self-help rather than essential daily practice. When he committed to 30 consecutive days without missing a single morning meditation, breakthrough occurred on day 28. He documented this carefully because his analytical mind needed proof. The first 27 days showed minimal external change. Day 28 brought a business opportunity that solved his financial crisis completely. He realized that consciousness was building invisibly until reaching critical mass that erupted into material demonstration. The third obstacle is practicing while secretly doubting. You go through the motions of recognizing spiritual reality while your deeper mind whispers, "This won't work." This divided consciousness neutralizes your practice. Goldsmith taught that spiritual realization requires wholehearted recognition, not intellectual agreement mixed with emotional skepticism. This doesn't mean forcing yourself to believe what seems impossible. It means being honest about your doubts while choosing to practice anyway. Say to yourself, "I don't fully believe this yet, but I commit to practicing as if spiritual reality is true for 90 days, then evaluating results honestly." This approach respects your skepticism while creating space for genuine experience to develop. Many of Goldsmith's most devoted students began exactly this way. They practiced despite doubts, allowing experience to gradually dissolve skepticism through undeniable results. Faith grew from evidence, not before it. A scientist who applied this honest approach documented her journey. She rated her belief level daily on a scale of 1 to 10. Started at 3. By day 60, genuine experiences had raised it to 8. By day 90, measurable life changes convinced her completely. Doubt dissolved in the face of reproducible results. The fourth obstacle is misunderstanding what spiritual realization means. People think it requires feeling peaceful, having mystical visions, or experiencing emotional highs. When these don't come, they assume they're failing. But Goldsmith taught that realization is quiet recognition of truth, not emotional experience or psychic phenomena. You recognize spiritual reality the same way you recognize any truth. When someone tells you 2 + 2 = 4, you recognize this truth without emotional fireworks or mystical sensations. Spiritual realization works identically. You quietly recognize, spiritual perfection exists now. This simple recognition is the realization that changes everything. Stop waiting for dramatic spiritual experiences to validate your practice. The consciousness shift is often subtle, almost unnoticeable in the moment. You realize later that your thinking has changed, your reactions have shifted, your peace has deepened. These quiet transformations in consciousness precede obvious life changes. A nurse who struggled with this finally understood when her colleague pointed out changes she hadn't noticed in herself. Her anxiety around difficult patients had disappeared. Her effectiveness had increased. Her home life had improved. The transformation happened so naturally she missed it while waiting for dramatic spiritual breakthrough. If these obstacle-dissolving insights empower your practice, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual techniques, and comment. Which barrier are you now ready to overcome in your consciousness journey? Now let's explore advanced integration of these practices into complex modern life. Critics often claim spiritual teachings work only for people with simple lives, plenty of time, and few responsibilities. But Goldsmith's most successful students were busy professionals facing intense demands. They proved consciousness work enhances, rather than escapes, worldly effectiveness. The key is portable practice. You don't need hours of meditation when 30 minutes daily builds sufficient consciousness foundation. Throughout your busy day, practice micro-moments of spiritual recognition. Waiting at traffic lights, between meetings, standing in lines, pause internally. Recognize spiritual reality present now. These seconds accumulate into consciousness shift. A trial attorney with crushing caseload and constant deadline pressure integrated practice this way. Morning meditation anchored her day. Brief recognition moments throughout maintained spiritual consciousness amid chaos. Evening reflection processed the day through spiritual lens. Within months, her effectiveness increased while her stress decreased. She won cases that seemed impossible because her consciousness clarity revealed strategies her anxious mind had missed. Opposing counsel commented on her unusual calm under pressure. Clients felt reassured by her confidence. Her career advanced as her spiritual practice deepened. The two didn't conflict. They synergized. Advanced practice involves maintaining spiritual recognition during active challenges, not just peaceful meditation. When crisis hits, untrained consciousness reverts to material panic. Trained consciousness pivots immediately to spiritual recognition. What is the truth here? What spiritual reality exists behind this appearance? This instant pivot during difficulty is mastery-level practice. It doesn't come naturally or easily. It develops through months of consistent foundational practice that builds new neural pathways and consciousness patterns. But once established, this ability transforms how you move through every challenge. A physician practiced this during medical emergencies. When critical situations arose, she maintained split awareness, handling medical protocols expertly while simultaneously recognizing spiritual perfection as underlying truth. She noticed that patients with seemingly identical conditions responded differently based on her consciousness state during treatment. When she maintained spiritual recognition, despite medical crisis, outcomes improved beyond statistical expectation. When she slipped into pure medical anxiety, outcomes matched predictable statistics. This pattern repeated too consistently to dismiss. Her consciousness directly influenced healing outcomes in measurable, documentable ways. Another advanced application involves practicing for others without their knowledge or cooperation. Critics say if consciousness truly creates conditions, you should be able to help anyone regardless of their awareness. Goldsmith addressed this directly. You can hold truth for another, but you can't make them demonstrate it. Here's how it works. When someone you care about faces difficulty, don't pray for God to fix their problem. Instead, recognize spiritual truth about them. This person is spiritual being, complete and whole right now. This appearance of lack or discord isn't truth. Hold this recognition without telling them, without trying to convince them. A mother practiced this for her adult son who battled addiction. She stopped pleading with him to change, stopped praying desperately for divine intervention. Instead, she daily recognized his spiritual perfection as present reality, regardless of his material behavior. She released him to his own journey while holding truth in consciousness. After 8 months, he entered recovery voluntarily through circumstances no one could have orchestrated. He later told her he felt supported in a way he couldn't explain, as if invisible strength carried him when he had none himself. Her consciousness work for him created spiritual space for his own healing to unfold naturally. The ultimate advanced practice is maintaining spiritual consciousness as your permanent perspective, not just during meditation or when you remember. You live, work, relate, and create from spiritual foundation continuously. Material concerns get handled practically, but never from material consciousness as primary reality. This doesn't make you detached or ineffective. It makes you more present, more capable, more genuinely helpful to others. You bring spiritual dimension into every interaction and activity. People feel it without naming it. Your presence alone begins shifting consciousness around you because you're established in truth. Goldsmith lived this way. People reported that being near him changed their consciousness without words exchanged. His established spiritual realization created a field that elevated everyone in proximity. This wasn't mystical magic, it was consciousness law. Strong spiritual recognition impacts surrounding consciousness fields naturally. You develop this through years of consistent practice, not weeks or months. But the journey itself transforms every aspect of your life progressively. Each day of practice builds consciousness momentum. Each challenge faced from spiritual perspective strengthens your realization. Eventually, spiritual consciousness becomes your natural state. Material consciousness, the temporary illusion it always was. We've reached the threshold of total transformation, the complete reorientation from material to spiritual as your primary reality. This is where criticism ends because you've become living proof of what you once doubted. Your life demonstrates what arguments never could. Critics fall silent before undeniable demonstration. The transformed life doesn't mean problem-free existence. It means problems no longer define you or control your consciousness. Challenges arise, you recognize spiritual truth, solutions appear, life flows forward. You're not fighting reality, you're aligned with reality at its spiritual foundation. This alignment is effortless power. People notice the change without understanding its source. They comment on your peace during crisis, your clarity under pressure, your effectiveness without visible stress. They ask what's different about you. Your answer is simple. I learned to recognize what's real. You don't preach, you demonstrate. A former critic who became devoted student said it best. I spent 20 years arguing against spiritual causation using impressive intellectual arguments. Then I practiced for 6 months and experienced what argument could never provide. Now I'm no longer interested in defending my old position. I'm living from truth. The transformation reaches into every life dimension. Health improves not through obsessive focus on symptoms, but through consciousness established in spiritual wholeness. Relationships deepen as you recognize spiritual identity in yourself and others beneath personality conflicts. Work becomes fulfilling as you bring spiritual consciousness into daily activities. Financial circumstances shift as you release anxiety-driven striving and allow spiritual law to govern supply. You take intelligent action, but from consciousness of abundance rather than fear of lack. Resources appear through channels you never could have engineered through human planning alone. Most remarkably, inner peace becomes your default state, not because life becomes problem-free, but because your consciousness rests in spiritual foundation, unshaken by material fluctuations. Joy arises independently of circumstances. Love flows naturally toward all beings. This is the transformation that converts critics into believers. A businessman who initially dismissed these teachings as impractical mysticism now teaches them to his company leadership. He watched spiritual practice transform not just his personal life, but his entire organization. Culture shifted from competitive anxiety to collaborative creativity. Results improved as stress decreased. Consciousness principles proved more practical than material methods. Your new perspective recognizes that everything Goldsmith taught was provable through practice, not provable through argument. The critics who never genuinely practiced remained critics. The critics who honestly tested the teachings became teachers. The difference wasn't intellectual capacity, it was willingness to experiment beyond conceptual debate. This is why your mind has changed if you've followed this message sincerely. You recognize now that spiritual consciousness isn't religious dogma or wishful thinking. It's practical power accessible through specific practices that produce reproducible results. The mystics weren't dreamers. They were scientists exploring consciousness dimensions that material science ignores. You understand now that criticism without practice is meaningless. Only direct experience validates or invalidates spiritual teachings. Goldsmith never asked anyone to believe without testing. He simply said, practice consistently for sufficient time, observe results honestly, then draw your conclusions. Those who accepted this challenge discovered truth. Your journey from skepticism to understanding mirrors countless others who walked this path before you. Each person who genuinely practices adds their demonstration to the mounting evidence that consciousness is causal, spiritual reality is primary, and material appearance is effect rather than cause. The final transformation is becoming someone who helps others discover what you've found, not through argument or persuasion, but through embodiment and invitation. Your changed life raises questions in others. Your peace amid chaos makes them curious. Your effectiveness without visible stress makes them wonder what you know that they don't. When they ask, you share simply. Recognize spiritual reality as primary truth. Practice this recognition consistently. Watch your life transform naturally. You don't convince, you invite. You don't debate, you demonstrate. Your greatest teaching is your transformed consciousness manifesting as changed circumstances. This is how spiritual truth spreads, not through intellectual conquest, but through individual demonstration, multiplying across human consciousness. Each person who genuinely practices becomes living proof. Each transformed life inspires others to test the teachings themselves. Truth validates itself through reproducible results. You came to this message as a critic or skeptic, questioning if Joel Goldsmith's teachings held genuine value or just sounded appealing. Now you know. The teachings work for anyone who practices consistently with honesty and patience. The transformation is real, the power is accessible, and the results speak for themselves in life after transformed life. If your consciousness and perspective have genuinely expanded through these teachings, like this video to help others discover this transformative path. Subscribe for continued spiritual wisdom, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your shift from criticism to understanding. Before you dismiss mystical experiences as imagination or wishful thinking, let me share what happened to Joel Goldsmith one quiet evening in 1928. This revelation would transform not only his life but thousands of others who discovered the profound truth he uncovered that night. That evening, alone in his room, Joel experienced something beyond ordinary consciousness. A presence filled his awareness, bringing with it an understanding that would challenge everything he believed about healing, God, and human limitation. This wasn't a dream or meditation vision. What he discovered in that moment became the foundation of a healing practice that defied medical explanation. People with terminal diagnoses found themselves completely restored. Business failures turned into unprecedented success through this mystical understanding. The presence whispered secrets that would revolutionize spiritual healing. Joel realized he had touched something that mystics throughout history had discovered but rarely shared openly. This experience would become his life's mission to teach others. The presence that visited Joel that evening whispered a truth so simple yet revolutionary that it would shake the foundations of traditional religious thinking. It revealed that God is not separate from us, waiting to be petitioned, but is the very essence of our being manifesting as individual consciousness. This wasn't mere philosophy or religious doctrine that Joel had studied in books. He felt this truth in every cell of his body. The separation between human and divine dissolved completely, revealing an intimate connection that had always existed but remained hidden from ordinary awareness. From that moment forward, Joel's life became a living demonstration of this mystical principle. Healing flowed through him not because he possessed special powers, but because he had awakened to the divine nature already present within every person who walked the earth. The transformation was immediate and permanent. Joel never again experienced himself as separate from divine consciousness. This mystical union became the source of healing power that would touch thousands of lives across the globe. Joel's mystical experience revealed what he called the infinite way, a path where healing happens not through human effort but through recognition of our divine nature. This wasn't about positive thinking or mental techniques, but about awakening to spiritual reality that exists beyond physical appearances. The presence showed him that every problem, every limitation, every disease exists only in the realm of human belief. When we touch the mystical dimension of consciousness, these appearances dissolve naturally because they have no foundation in spiritual truth or divine reality. This understanding challenged every conventional approach to healing that Joel had previously studied. He discovered that mystical consciousness doesn't fight problems or try to overcome them through willpower. It simply reveals their unreality in divine consciousness. The divine presence within us is already whole, already perfect, already free from every limitation that appears to human sense. Joel learned that healing means recognizing this perfection, rather than trying to create it through human effort. What makes Joel's mystical revelation so powerful is its practical application in everyday life. This wasn't an otherworldly experience that left him floating in spiritual clouds, disconnected from human concerns. Instead, it gave him concrete tools for transformation that anyone could learn to use effectively. The mystical state Joel accessed became his normal consciousness through dedicated practice and surrender. He learned to enter this awareness at will, bringing divine perspective to every human challenge. This is the secret that transformed ordinary people into spiritual healers. You don't need special gifts or years of training to access this mystical dimension of consciousness. Joel's method reveals how to touch this healing consciousness right now, in this moment, regardless of your background, education, or current circumstances. The key is understanding that mystical consciousness is not something you achieve, but something you recognize. It's your true nature waiting to be acknowledged and allowed to express through your individual experience. Margaret Stevens had been told by 3 different doctors that her arthritis would confine her to a wheelchair within months. Traditional medicine offered only temporary relief through increasingly stronger medications with devastating side effects that were destroying her digestive system. When Margaret first heard about Joel's mystical approach to healing, she was deeply skeptical. How could spiritual consciousness possibly affect physical conditions that medical science couldn't cure? But desperation and the fear of permanent disability led her to attend one of Joel's healing sessions. During the session, Joel entered that mystical state he had discovered years earlier. Without touching Margaret or even speaking directly to her, he held her in divine consciousness, recognizing her spiritual perfection. Within minutes, the chronic pain that had tormented her for years simply vanished. 3 months later, Margaret was hiking in the mountains with her grandchildren, completely free from arthritis. Her transformation wasn't gradual improvement over time, but instant recognition of her spiritual perfection that dissolved the physical limitation entirely. Robert Chen faced bankruptcy after his construction business collapsed during the economic downturn. Creditors were demanding immediate payment, his family faced losing their home, and every conventional business strategy he had tried failed completely to turn the situation around. Robert discovered Joel's teachings about mystical consciousness affecting material circumstances. Initially, this seemed impossible. How could spiritual awareness influence bank accounts and business contracts? Yet desperation made him willing to try anything, even approaches that seemed impractical. Following Joel's method carefully, Robert learned to enter mystical consciousness before making business decisions. Instead of operating from fear and desperation, he accessed divine wisdom that revealed unexpected solutions and opportunities that his human thinking had completely overlooked. Within 6 months, Robert's business had not only recovered, but expanded beyond his original success. The mystical principle Joel taught him opened doors that human effort alone could never have accessed, creating abundance through divine guidance. Dr. Patricia Williams was a respected surgeon who prided herself on scientific thinking and evidence-based medicine. When patients began asking her about Joel's mystical healing approach, she dismissed it as dangerous superstition that could interfere with proper medical treatment. Her skepticism shattered when her own daughter developed a rare neurological condition that medical science couldn't cure. After exhausting every conventional treatment and consulting specialists worldwide, Patricia reluctantly attended one of Joel's teachings about mystical consciousness. What she witnessed there challenged everything she believed about healing and the nature of reality. Joel demonstrated that mystical awareness could produce tangible physical changes that defied medical explanation. Patricia realized she had been limiting herself to only one dimension of healing. Patricia began integrating Joel's mystical principles with her medical practice. Her patients experienced faster recovery times and more complete healings when she combined surgical skill with mystical consciousness, creating remarkable results. The transformations you've just heard aren't isolated incidents, but examples of thousands who discovered Joel's mystical approach to healing and manifestation. Each person started exactly where you are now, wondering if mystical experiences could really produce practical results in their lives. Joel's method works because it's based on spiritual law rather than human willpower or positive thinking. When you touch mystical consciousness, you're not trying to make something happen through mental effort. You're recognizing what is already true in divine reality. The mystical dimension Joel discovered is available to you right now, in this very moment. It doesn't require years of preparation or special circumstances. It only requires willingness to move beyond conventional thinking into the realm of spiritual reality. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. What healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond healing physical conditions, Joel's mystical experience revealed techniques for transforming every area of life. He discovered that the same consciousness that heals bodies also dissolves financial lack, broken relationships, and career limitations that seem impossible to overcome through human effort. The first complementary technique Joel taught is called recognition. This involves identifying yourself with infinite spirit rather than limited human personality. When you recognize your divine nature, external circumstances must align with this higher identity because spiritual law governs all manifestation. Practice recognition by beginning each day with this mystical awareness. I am not human seeking God, but divine consciousness expressing as human form. This shifts your entire experience from limitation to infinite possibility, opening pathways that were previously invisible. This technique alone has transformed thousands of lives when practiced consistently with understanding. Recognition doesn't require you to deny human experience, but to see it from the perspective of divine consciousness expressing through individual form. Joel's second technique addresses the persistent human tendency to judge by appearances and accept surface conditions as ultimate reality. He learned that mystical consciousness sees through what appears to physical senses to underlying spiritual reality that remains unchanged by external circumstances. This practice, called seeing rightly, involves looking beyond what your physical senses report to what divine consciousness reveals. Where you see problems, mystical awareness perceives opportunities for spiritual demonstration. Where others see limitation, you recognize infinite possibility. When facing challenges, pause and ask divine consciousness to reveal the spiritual reality behind appearances. Joel discovered that this mystical perspective dissolves problems at their root, rather than merely managing symptoms or providing temporary relief from difficulties. Seeing rightly transforms your entire relationship with circumstances. Instead of being victim to conditions, you become witness to divine consciousness expressing perfect harmony through apparent discord and limitation. The third technique Joel developed focuses on what he called impersonal love. This isn't emotional affection or human sentiment, but mystical consciousness recognizing divine perfection in everyone and everything, regardless of their behavior or appearance to human sense. Impersonal love sees beyond human personality to the Christ nature present in all beings. This mystical vision dissolves conflicts, heals relationships, and reveals harmony where discords seem to exist. It's the most powerful relationship transformer Joel ever discovered. Practice impersonal love by silently blessing difficult people with recognition of their divine nature. Joel discovered that this mystical approach transforms relationships more effectively than any human psychology or communication technique because it works at the level of consciousness. When you consistently practice impersonal love, you'll notice that people respond to you differently because you're seeing their spiritual identity rather than their human personality. This creates space for their higher nature to emerge. Joel's fourth technique involves understanding the mystical principle of non-reaction. Instead of being pulled into drama and conflict, mystical consciousness remains anchored in spiritual truth, regardless of outer circumstances or other people's behavior and emotional states. Non-reaction doesn't mean being passive or uncaring about life around you. Rather, it means responding from divine wisdom instead of human emotion. This mystical centeredness allows appropriate action without being controlled by external pressures or other people's energy. When chaos surrounds you, return to mystical awareness of your divine nature. Joel taught that this inner stillness becomes a sanctuary that nothing external can disturb, providing guidance and peace in any situation you might encounter. Non-reaction creates space between you and circumstances, allowing divine consciousness to respond through you rather than reactive human personality. This transforms you from victim to spiritual presence in every situation. Even with these powerful techniques, you may encounter challenges in developing mystical consciousness. Joel himself faced periods when the divine presence seemed distant and healing power appeared to diminish. These experiences are normal parts of spiritual development, not failures. The most common obstacle is trying to use mystical principles as techniques to get something rather than recognizing what already is. Joel learned that divine consciousness cannot be manipulated, but only surrendered to and recognized as your true nature. When mystical experiences don't come easily, Joel recommended returning to the fundamental recognition of your divine nature. Don't try to make something happen through spiritual effort. Simply acknowledge what is eternally true about your spiritual identity. Remember that mystical consciousness is not an achievement but a recognition. You're not trying to become something you're not, but awakening to what you have always been beneath the surface of human personality and conditioning. Another challenge involves maintaining mystical consciousness in daily activities. It's easier to touch divine awareness in meditation than while dealing with traffic, demanding bosses, or crying children. Yet Joel discovered this integration is where real transformation occurs. Joel learned that mystical consciousness isn't an escape from human experience, but a way of transforming it from within. Divine awareness doesn't require perfect external conditions, but brings perfection to whatever conditions exist in your immediate experience. Practice carrying mystical consciousness into ordinary activities by frequently remembering your divine nature throughout the day. Joel taught that brief moments of recognition are more effective than lengthy meditations followed by unconscious living. The goal isn't to live in a monastery, but to transform everyday life into spiritual practice. Every interaction becomes opportunity to express divine consciousness. Every challenge becomes invitation to demonstrate spiritual truth. Many people struggle with doubt about their mystical experiences. When divine consciousness produces healing or unexpected solutions, the human mind questions whether it was coincidence or imagination. This doubt can block further spiritual development if not addressed properly. Joel learned to trust mystical experiences even when they couldn't be explained rationally. Divine consciousness operates beyond human logic and doesn't require intellectual understanding to be effective. Faith in spiritual reality deepens through experience, not explanation. Document your experiences with mystical consciousness, noting both dramatic and subtle changes in your life circumstances. Joel found that keeping records helps overcome doubt and builds confidence in divine guidance and healing power working through you. Don't expect others to understand or validate your mystical experiences. Joel discovered that spiritual awakening often creates temporary separation from those who haven't had similar experiences, but this resolves as love and understanding replace judgment. The greatest challenge in mystical development is consistency. Joel observed that people often experience profound divine consciousness initially, then struggle to maintain this awareness over time as old patterns of thinking and reacting reassert themselves.
He discovered that mystical consciousness isn't achieved once and kept forever like a college degree. It must be cultivated daily through recognition, practice, and surrender to divine guidance. Like physical fitness, spiritual awareness requires ongoing attention and commitment.
Create daily practices that reconnect you with mystical consciousness. Joel recommended starting each morning with recognition of your divine nature and ending each evening with gratitude for divine guidance throughout the day, regardless of how successful you felt. Consistency in small practices creates foundation for major spiritual breakthroughs. Joel found that students who maintained simple daily recognition often experienced more profound transformation than those who sought dramatic mystical experiences. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment. Which obstacle are you ready to transform now? After years of developing mystical consciousness, Joel began applying these principles to increasingly complex situations. He discovered that divine awareness could transform not just individual problems, but entire communities and organizations when properly understood and applied. One advanced application involves bringing mystical consciousness to social and environmental challenges. Joel learned that when groups of people unite in divine awareness, they can influence collective consciousness and create positive change on scales far beyond individual transformation. This doesn't mean trying to force outcomes through spiritual manipulation or imposing your will on others. Instead, it involves holding collective situations in divine consciousness, allowing spiritual truth to transform circumstances through natural unfoldment of divine order. Joel witnessed remarkable transformations in communities where groups practiced mystical consciousness together. Crime rates decreased, economic conditions improved, and social harmony increased as divine consciousness penetrated collective human consciousness. Joel's mature mystical practice extended to what he called global healing work. He discovered that divine consciousness knows no geographical boundaries and can bring healing influence to people and situations anywhere in the world through transcendence of space and time. This advanced practice involves entering mystical consciousness and holding specific people, communities, or situations in divine awareness without trying to determine outcomes. The healing power of mystical consciousness flows where it's needed most, guided by divine wisdom. Many students reported remarkable synchronicities when practicing global healing work. They received unexpected help during Joel's mystical sessions, or found solutions to problems, while Joel held them in divine consciousness from thousands of miles away, demonstrating spiritual interconnectedness. Global healing work reveals that mystical consciousness operates beyond physical laws. Distance, time, and material conditions cannot limit the expression of divine love and healing power when channeled through awakened consciousness. Perhaps Joel's most advanced mystical application involved what he called resurrection work, bringing divine consciousness to situations that appeared hopeless or beyond human help. This practice requires complete surrender of human judgment about what's possible. Joel learned to approach apparently desperate circumstances with mystical consciousness that recognizes only divine perfection and infinite possibility. He refused to accept human limitations as final or to be impressed by negative medical, financial, or relationship diagnoses. Resurrection work produced some of Joel's most dramatic healings, restoring relationships that had ended bitterly, reviving businesses that had completely failed, and bringing healing to conditions medical science considered terminal and beyond hope. This advanced practice isn't about denial of problems, but recognition that divine consciousness is more powerful than any human condition. Joel demonstrated that there are no hopeless situations, only limited perspectives that mystical awareness can transform. In his later years, Joel developed mystical consciousness to the point where divine awareness became his normal state, rather than something he accessed occasionally during meditation or healing sessions. This constant mystical consciousness transformed everything he touched. People reported feeling healing energy simply by being in Joel's presence, even when he wasn't consciously trying to heal anyone. His mystical consciousness created an atmosphere where problems resolved naturally, and divine guidance flowed freely to everyone around him. This advanced state isn't reserved for special individuals or spiritual masters. Joel insisted that every person has the capacity to develop mystical consciousness to this degree through consistent practice and surrender to divine guidance over time. The key is understanding that mystical consciousness isn't the achievement to attain, but your natural state to uncover. Beneath layers of human conditioning and social programming lies your divine nature, waiting to be recognized and expressed. The ultimate goal of Joel's mystical path isn't to gain special powers or achieve personal advantages over others. It's to become a transparent channel for divine consciousness, to bless the world through your unique expression and individual gifts. This complete transformation happens gradually as you consistently choose mystical awareness over human reaction in daily situations. Joel taught that spiritual maturity means being more concerned with giving divine love than receiving human approval or recognition. When mystical consciousness becomes your primary identity, you discover that your deepest fulfillment comes from serving as an instrument of divine healing and guidance for others who are ready to awaken to their own spiritual nature. Personal desires don't disappear but are transformed. Instead of seeking to get something from life, you become focused on what divine consciousness wants to give through you. This shift creates profound satisfaction and purpose. Joel's mystical vision ultimately revealed that there is no separation between individual consciousness and universal divine consciousness. What appears as personal awakening is actually recognition of the one infinite spirit expressing as all beings and all creation. This understanding dissolves the final illusion of separate selfhood that keeps humans feeling isolated and limited. You realize that your mystical experiences aren't personal achievements, but glimpses of the divine nature that is equally present in everyone and everything. From this mystical perspective, healing others and healing yourself are the same activity. Blessing others and being blessed are one movement of divine consciousness, recognizing its own infinite nature, expressing through apparent multiplicity. This recognition eliminates spiritual pride and competition. You can't be superior to others because you recognize that the same divine consciousness expressing through you is expressing through them, waiting to be acknowledged and allowed. As Joel's mystical consciousness matured, he discovered that the divine presence he had first encountered in 1928 was actually his own deepest nature finally recognizing itself. The separation between human Joel and divine presence was revealed as illusion, created by identification with personality. This recognition transforms your entire approach to spiritual practice. Instead of seeking connection with God somewhere outside yourself, you realize you are the expression of divine consciousness seeking to recognize itself more completely through human experience. Every moment becomes an opportunity for deeper mystical awareness. Whether dealing with mundane tasks or profound challenges, you can always return to recognition of your divine nature and allow this consciousness to guide your responses. The search for God ends when you realize God is what you are. The mystical journey becomes not about reaching some distant goal, but about expressing divine consciousness more fully in present circumstances. The mystical experience that transformed Joel's life is available to you right now in this very moment. It doesn't require special circumstances, years of preparation, or exceptional spiritual gifts. It only requires willingness to recognize your divine nature as present reality. Begin this moment by acknowledging that infinite spirit is your true identity, not your human personality or life circumstances. Feel this mystical consciousness flowing through your awareness, bringing with it the healing power that dissolved Joel's limitations and can dissolve yours. You are not separate from the divine presence that visited Joel that evening in 1928. You are that presence, awakening to its own infinite nature and unlimited power to heal, bless, and transform everything it touches through your individual expression. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path.